Welcome to SalonEra, a salon experience for the 21st century that brings together artists and audiences for music and conversation. A remotely produced variety show, every episode of SalonEra is full of different artists, different music, and spontaneous conversation. This season, we will bring together artists from across North America and around the world directly into your home with 12 episodes between September and April. New episodes will span the medieval through the early Romantic periods as we explore music from Latin America, the Ottoman Empire, and the Philippines, probe the ecstatic mysteries of divine love, and consider how scientific fascination with natural phenomena gets reflected in Schubert later. And that's just for starters. We would love to see and feel your encouragement or applause tonight, so feel free to engage in the chat at any time. We also look forward to responding to your thoughts and questions when we go live for the post-show Q&A. While SalonEra is free to watch, I urge you to consider making a donation. Your donation directly supports the creation of new episodes, and it helps compensate our participating artists. New this year, you can also enjoy exclusive access to episodes from our acclaimed first season when you subscribe to the series. Visit salonera.org/support to donate or subscribe today. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show. 1500 is more than just a tantalizingly beautiful round number situated halfway between the millennia. It was truly a pivotal moment when developments in science, technology, global discovery, and visual art changed the world quite literally, as everyone knew it. Advances in astronomy and mathematics fueled the Age of Discovery, which in turn made circumnavigating the globe a possibility, fundamentally redrawing maps of the world. At the same time, civilizations were irrevocably changed. The expulsion of Jews and Muslims from the Iberian Peninsula reverberated across Europe and the Middle East, while within just a few years, the arrival of Spaniards in the New World had a cataclysmic effect on the Aztec and Inca empires. Beyond the transformative work of artist-inventors such as Leonardo da Vinci and Nicholas Copernicus, the decades around 1500 constitute a moment when instrumental music finally began to come into its own. A proliferation of printed music, led by Ottaviano Petrucci's landmark 1501 songbook called Odecaton, testifies to these trends. As we'll hear in this episode, not only did instruments like the lute and keyboard take up the challenge of playing polyphonic songs in intabulations, but composers and performers are obsessed with new forms of virtuosity. We also see the emergence of wholly instrumental genres like ricercares, toccatas, and even nascent dance suites. This time of invention and innovation also saw the birth of the violin and viol families of instruments. Our guests, violinist and vielle player Scott Metcalfe and lutenist Esteban Rotta, will talk about their experience with music from this time. The music itself prompts many questions. What instruments or voices are needed or implied to perform it? What techniques may be required? What can we learn from looking at images of performers? We'll end our episode with music by Josquin de Prez, whose work spans the generations from late medieval to Renaissance. Steeped in musical traditions and compositional style of the 15th century, Josquin helped create the new 16th century style of pervasive imitation. Esteban Rotta joins us from Montreal, Quebec, and Scott Metcalfe is at home in Watertown, Massachusetts. Welcome. Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Deborah. Nice to see you.
Always nice to see you here. I'm excited to be talking, for once, not about my show. We're focused today on really the decades right around 1500, which is to say really the late 15th century. And you have a lot of experience there. One of the major projects I know that you've been involved with, a multi-year project, is about the composer Aquila at his 600th anniversary and and related repertories, which is really what we're kind of talking about tonight. And I wondered if we might start out by talking about your experience with 15th century song, Aquila and his contemporaries, and some of the issues that performing that music poses for you as a kind of a performer and programmer of that music.
Well, the big question about the 15th century song is what is a given song actually scored for? Mm-hmm. And it used to be thought back in sort of before the 1970s, if you had a song, if you had a text written under it, that was sung, and if it didn't have a text, that was clearly played. And even perhaps these melismatic, non-texted parts of songs, maybe they were even played, alternating with the singer singing the texted parts. Then there was an argument emerged in the 80s, or sort of beginning around 1980-ish, that no, actually every part of a song was ideally intended by the composer to be sung. Mm-hmm. And the argument was really began to be created about 14th century song, and then it was sort of carried over into the next century. And so that was that was the norm, that was the desirable standard. And there were some very, very influential and beautiful recordings made notably by Gothic voices under the direction of Christopher Page, who's one of the people making this argument in the early days. Right. And that changed the field for everybody for quite a long time. This argument was pushed back against by American scholars, in particular Howard Mayer Brown of the University of Chicago. And I think he's the one who labels this whole idea the English a cappella heresy. But Howard never wrote the definitive rebuttal to these arguments, although there's a lot of material floating around. And nowadays, it's more felt that it's an open question. We don't really know. And you have these untexted parts. Are they actually for instruments? Are they for voices? If they're for voices, should the singer add words? If so, how do you add words?
Maybe we could look at a manuscript page. Actually, I have a page of the song that we will hear next, which is a chanson by Antoine Bounois, which is called Congé au cœur. And maybe that would give us an opportunity to see a little bit what you're talking about. Because I agree with you, there's a degree to which you can talk about kind of repertoires in the abstract. And then when you're actually looking at a single piece of music, by its very nature and how it's written, prompts very particular questions and then very particular solutions.
Yes, exactly. Each individual song probably has its own answer or answers. Here we're looking at a page of the Pixericourt Chansonnier, which is a later 15th century songbook. And this shows us the normal case of the later 15th century, the mid to late 15th century song. On the upper left, you'll see the discantus part, and it's got the text written underneath the notes. The relationship between the words and the notes is extremely vague and imprecise. And then to the right of it across the page, we see that's the contra, and written across the bottom of both pages is the tenor part. And neither the tenor nor the contra has text. They have a little bit, an incipit, but not any more than that. So the question is, what do we do with those bottom two parts? As has been often observed about 15th century songs, that these two parts, the tenor and the contra, are very different. They're a very different character. They're very different contrapuntal roles to play. You can leave the contra out entirely and have a self-sufficient, contrapuntally self-sufficient duet between the discantus and the tenor. And often the discantus and tenor will share material imitatively back and forth, which may not appear in the contra. It's not true in every song, of course, but often that's the case. And here, the tenor, if we look at the tenor part, you can see that it's fairly, it moves generally stepwise. It looks a lot like the discantus part, actually, in terms of its melodic content. And that does suggest a relationship to the discantus part, which may be more than just compositional. It may imply something about scoring as well. The contra, on the other hand, you can see right from the very beginning goes dee 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 bum ba da da da. It's all this be da dee da dee da dum, and that happens throughout this particular song. There are more rests, there's more ligatures, and this doesn't look particularly vocal. Now, it's very hard to say this is an instrumental part, this is a vocal part, because singers did things that instruments did, and instruments played vocal music, and it's very much a shared style. But this jumpy fifth sort of thing in a song where the other two parts are very smooth and melodic looks a lot like some sort of bass register instrument. Right. What it is another question.
And, and potentially something that fits in or under the hand.
Yes, sure.
Interestingly enough. So I think now would be a great time actually to hear how Blue Heron decided to deal with some of these issues in this song, beautifully performed with Kim Leeds. Let's listen. Wow, such a beautiful performance by Kim Scott and
Very
Charlotte
nice.
Weaver. Welcome, Esteban. It's great
Thank
to
you.
see and
Thank
have
you. It's
you
nice to
here.
be here.
Wonderful. We heard from Scott, about some of the issues or considerations and scoring or deciding who does what in a three-voice song. But what about the possibility of playing a song as a single person?
That's right. And we are going to be talking a little bit about it. So far, we have seen the lute used in playing a single line in a polyphonic composition, which is totally doable. And actually, it kept doing that role for even longer than we think. However, there was a big change in 1500 around, maybe a little bit before, in not that it was never done before, but suddenly began to take notice, and it made a revolution in the way the lute was conceived. And by now, it's quite understandable that this transition didn't happen overnight. So, and that transition I'm talking about is the going from using a pick, the way that we saw in the video, to using the fingers. And using a pick is related to the ancestor of the lute, the oud or alud, which actually that was the way that it was played and is still being played in some cultures today. But at some moment, the player that played this new instrument that we now call the lute stopped using the plectrum to play with the fingers. And it all comes, I'm going to read you a little bit what Tintori says in the Invenzione and Uso Musicae in 1478. He says, in these many, this is playing the lute, especially Germans, and exceptionally accomplished. Indeed, so play in ensemble the soprano part of any polyphonic piece of music with wonderful divisions of melody, so elegant that truly there is nothing more outstanding. Among these, Pietro Bono, the lutenist of the renowned Ercole Duke of Ferrara, in my opinion, of course, is to be preferred to the rest. Others, which is much more difficult, by themselves, must actually produce not only two parts of a piece of music, but even three or four, such as the Blind German, which we think is Conrad Palmen, and Henry, recently serving the most strong Charles, Duke of Burgundy. Furthermore, this skill playing makes the Germans celebrated above all. So this statement, written by Tintoris in 1478, created as well a debate, not like much different of what Scott was describing about the who plays what. So by 1478, lute players just stopped playing with the plectrum and stopped playing with the fingers because there is no other way of playing polyphony with the lute. However, now it's widely accepted that it's actually, in fact, possible, and it was done playing polyphony on the lute. So I wanted to take you a little bit of trip iconographically because there is no many more evidence of this in any writings. And of course, as we have seen with Scott, there is not part written for the lute yet.
Nowhere does it say, for the lute.
Exactly. Yeah. However, as we saw in Scott's version, the lute is a great instrument to play contralines because of the ability of playing these jumps that are quite stylistic of the contrawriting. So most of the times when the lute is playing a single melodic line, is most of the times playing the contra. But it's never written lute part, right? So the same way, before we actually have lute tablatures, we are going to talk about that a little bit later. There is no evidence of what was the lute doing before. So the only thing that we can do is iconographically try to see what we can actually infer by these paintings. Yeah.
Right. So you have for us a few images to look at, and they move a little bit chronologically, and I think you're going to unpack for us a little bit what is implied by basically, by looking at the different hand positions, how they might be playing and or what they might be playing.
Organology and iconography is an art that is completely subjective and open to interpretation. But at some moments, when we don't have more tools, we can do our best and take our conclusions. So, of course, there could be many other options of readings of these paintings, but this is my reading, and this is how, in my mind, it did evolve. So the first painting that we're going to see is an example, a late example of what I call the first playing technique, which I described a little bit more, which is very real, described it before, that is related to the earlier way of playing the oud. So we are going to see now, there is the Aston steeple. This is around 1310. And what I want you to see is the position of the hand is a little bit crooked. Kind of, I don't know what is the best way to see it, like this. And if you see earlier paintings like in the Cantigas or anything that is 1300s or 1200s, you're going to see these hand positions. Not because they didn't know how to draw a hand, but because maybe they are trying to really reflect a way that the way the instrument was being played. And if you see now an oud player, that's more or less what they do. They bend the hand in order to create weight to every single note that they are playing. And so accentuating a little bit each note and being able to be agile and precise with the playing. Right. Another important thing is that the plectrum used to pluck the strings, we don't see it quite well in this painting, but it's usually hard as in a piece of wood or a piece of bone, nothing like a feather or nothing like, like very flexible, but it's usually something. That's why as well they have to do really lots of weight on the hand in order to do this. This to me is a sign that no polyphonic line is being played. Of course, it's too early to think of in terms of polyphony in the way that we think of in the Renaissance. Another way to give this up is that frets is another innovation that is going to allow the lute to play polyphonically. Of course, you can play 2 or 3 notes in a non-fretted instrument, but not with the precision that you require. And Crawford Young, great lute player and one of the figures of the revival of this kind of technique, set the first images of lutes with frets or any kind of string instrument to be plucked around 1420. So
I didn't realize
most
that.
likely there is not going to be any polyphonic playing before that.
Right. The next image that you were going to show us is from just after or around 1420. So how is that reflected?
Exactly. So in the next image, this is painted by Circa. It's called the Virginian Child with 6 angels. And this is just this is one of the 6 angels, of course. Here we see not only the frets, but the frets are double, which is quite amazing. And if we see the whole painting eventually, we see how small the whole lute and the angel are. So to be able to be this detailed, the painter is actually an amazing one. So the first difference that I want you to see is that the hand is not longer bent, but is straight and coming straight from behind the lute. That allows a different kind of flexibility in where not every single note is the weight is not accentuated. However, the hand is completely closed. These fingers are not being used at all. And we see a little piece of we cannot tell yet what it is. Probably can be just a piece of a quill, can be just a little string, but it's really flexible and not hard. It's not a piece of bone, it's not a piece of wood. So that allows as well for the notes to be a little bit faster and lighter in texture. So this is the kind of technique that someone would have used to play a contraline, for example. But the fact that the fingers are closed doesn't mean that they were not playing more than one line at a time. If we now jump to the next image, which is contemporary, more or less, is played by Masaccio in 1426. So here, this little angel, a big angel, because we don't know how big an angel is, so we don't know how big this lute is or anything. He's about actually to strum the strings. It's what copying the movement, not only of play lightly, but I think he's going to go for all the strings at the same time. And this is a technique that in German is called Laotischlagen, which means literally striking the lute. and it's been described by like Mark Lewin as in many others of a way of early polyphonic playing, especially for German music, in where all the notes that you are playing are chords, and you strum them and bring out some of the inner lines. So yes, it's possible to play polyphonic pieces in the lute in this way. However, the most important sign of polyphonic playing is the release of these closed fingers into an open hand position, yet still holding the little quill. And now that we see the little close-up of the little angel on the left, we see how his fingers are not only open, but are almost touching the strings. And there are other paintings that you can see actually this more clearly. And the other thing that we can see is that in between his two fingers, we see two little pieces of something that goes out, and now we believe it's a piece of string folded in a loop. And that's the way that in the pieces that we are going to see me playing, that's the way that I'm experimenting and doing so. Of course, I'm not the only one doing it. That's one of the plectrum that is that produces the quality of the sound mostly designed for this kind of music, because it's much softer than hardened or a plastic surface. This is quite interesting because it shows that not only you are playing or strumming the lute, but you have 2 or 3 fingers free in order to play the other accompanying lines. So this shows how the lute was able to take over the Renaissance by allowing you to be a one-man band.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting, and it's really interesting to see this evolution. So I thank you for sharing it with us and recognizing that, that not all changes take place simultaneously, and none of these playing techniques sort of like instantly fall away, and vice versa. But let's listen now to your performance of an intabulation of a song by Oswald von Wolkenstein, Ich Klag, and you've given us some beautiful footage also where we get to see you close up with the pick and the open hand technique.
And one little thing more about it is that the lute that I'm using was recently built by Michael Schreiner here in, he lives now in Montreal, though he was in Toronto at the time. That was based on the painting that we just saw.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, so that was quite neat.
Wonderful performance. Thank you so much, Esteban. Well, I mentioned super briefly in the opening to the episode about this kind of revolution in printing, music printing, that happened with the work of Ottaviano Petrucci in 1501, printing the first polyphonic songbook, really beautifully, the very complicated printing system that I don't necessarily need or want to go into. But not only did Petrucci print songs and motets, but he got into printing lute music specifically and intabulations of lute music, and in a way that really turned, this kind of like, personal practice of translating a three-voice song, for, by an individual performer into, a whole repertoire that could be distributed in that way. And I wondered, the next thing we're going to listen to and enjoy is actually a early 16th, so from the first decade or so of the 16th century intabulation of a song, which in this case comes from a manuscript. But I was hoping, Esteban, that you might tell us a little bit about it, just by Marco Dalaquila, and what is going on, or what the trends are around printing lute music.
That's right. So a little bit of context. First of all, just in case our listeners are not aware, what is an intabulation? As we saw in the first piece that we were looking at, music printing, or like the manuscripts, were organized in a way that all the parts are separate.
Right.
And of course, there is like few copies of each one, so it's not that each performer has their own copy. So most likely, all of the performers have to read from the same source. So the only way to organize these parts, because keep in mind that at the moment they didn't have what we call now a musical score or partitura, was to make a table or to sit at the table in order to do this work. Intabulare. Petrucci got this license from the Dutch in Venice, which allowed him to be the only one printing any kind of music for 20 years, which 20 years is not a big time in our head, but in the time was like a long life. However, the composer of the next piece, Marco Dalaquila, somehow around the same time, the 1509, got the 1505, got the license as well to produce music himself. So the next piece that we are going to hear comes from one of these pieces that was compiled afterwards by this person, Marco Dalaquila, who had the license as well at the same time of Petrucci to print lute music.
Fantastic. And there's a very special, very personal aspect to this particular performance.
Yes. It was recorded actually at the beginning of the pandemic when we were trying to find new ways to express ourselves. And my partner is a great choreographer, Baroque and Renaissance dancer, but as well contemporary dancer, Stéphanie Brochat, who is the colleague of Marina Pellier-Lacrozier. And we decided we cannot take this more, we have to create. So we did a home video recording of 3 different moments of the day interacting in different ways. This is the second one, which is in the afternoon. We just use the light of the sun. That's why like sometimes it changes color and stuff.
Yeah.
And the way of interacting, we just wanted to show how our life was together. So the way that she's dancing, she used the living space and the mirror that we have in the corner, incorporating some elements of Renaissance dance, but as well some very personal aspects of her choreography.
Wonderful. Well, let's enjoy this kind of beautiful and very intimate and creative moment from early in the pandemic with the intabulation of La Traditora by Marco Dalaquila. I love that. And I love the use of the mirror and perspective and coming in and out of frame. And of course, the music is lovely as well and has a kind of popular quality as a Rotta or whatever that is. And in fact, this is like really the moment for this huge kind of blossoming of what we might think of as popular song. And in fact, Petrucci, the very first publication that he had, the so-called Odecaton, which literally means like 100 songs, is like the Billboard charts effectively. It's, recording an international kind of repertoire of popular songs, and sometimes the same song appearing in multiple versions. With other voices added, or like this is Agricola's version, or this is Josquin's version, and one of the most famous songs that I think there's well over 25 different settings of is De Tout Bien Plein, which originally probably comes from the 1460s or thereabout by a northern composer named Hen van Giesechem. And we thought for this episode, to create actually a few settings of De Tout Bien Plein. What we're going to hear in a moment is actually more or less the three-voice chanson by van Giesechem. But actually, we sandwiched it with an intabulation. So we hear it in three voices on three instruments, with you, Esteban, playing the contra voice. And then we hear you playing all three voices. And then we return to the three-voice texture. And then we have something else entirely, and I wonder that you might talk to us just a little bit. We have a two-voice setting by a composer that I know nothing about, and which we may not know very much about in general, named Rulken. And in that two-voice setting, it takes the tenor of the original song, which I play in Dusen, and then there's something amazing that happens in the other voice, in the superius.
Yes, this is a wonderful piece. It's one of my favorite pieces and one of my favorite tenors. Just a little bit of as well explanation about, because we have been talking a lot about tenors and contrasts and superiors and stuff. Tenor means actually to hold, tenere, right? So it's the voice that holds everything. Then you have a voice that is like the melodic line, and then a third one that, as Scott was saying, is there, it can be taken out because it doesn't actually affect too much the counterpoint, but is there to fill the gaps, and is contra means against. So it's against the tenor, contra tenor. So the way that variations or new compositions were written of, sometimes in the 15th century and at the beginning of the 16th, were not using the melody material of the actual melody, but of course based upon the tenor. And you didn't have to have the same material, but to write a new composition that matches contrapuntally on it. So this is the case that we are going to be hearing on Roelken. So we are not going to hear the melody of the two-beam plan that we will hear in the original version, but rather a counterpoint that works on top of the tenor. The composer is quite unknown. This is the only piece that we have. Roelken is believed to be a composer that we know a little bit more, and yet is quite unknown, who is called Rodolphe Agricola. But still is not much known other than this beautiful composition that we are going to hear.
Hi, I'm Shelby Yaman, Associate Producer for SalonEra. It's been my pleasure to help create this series, which supports working artists and creates opportunities for audiences anywhere and everywhere to learn about and enjoy music across history and cultures. I hope you enjoyed the remote collaboration we just heard, which was created especially for this episode. While recording remotely presents some unique challenges, we're so happy to be able to bring artists together for new collaborations and to share their fascinating and beautiful work. We'll return to the show in a moment, but in the meantime, please consider supporting these artists and SalonEra with a donation. New this year, you can enjoy exclusive access to episodes from our acclaimed first season when you subscribe to the series. Visit salonera.org/support to donate or subscribe today. Thank you.
Thank you, Esteban, for creating these wonderful remote collaborations. It was fun to do that. We are coming to the final section of our program today, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about, this kind of very famous name of the early Renaissance, Josquin de Prez. It's really a pivotal figure, as I said, whose career spans the 15th century. We're going to hear two pieces to close out our show this evening. And the two pieces that we'll hear are actually one more setting of the Tu bien plein in 4 voices, as well as a mass movement by Josquin from his Missa Fortuna Desperata. So that's to say a mass on a different popular song called Fortuna Desperata. Esteban, I wondered if you could just tell us what the special joy of playing the Josquin de Tu bien plein in 4 parts is.
Yes, this is one of the pieces that made me realize how big Josquin was in his way of thinking, in his way of writing. So we are going to hear another setting of the Tu bien plein. Again, and he kept actually the tenor and the discantus in this version. So writing a contra is not as simple already, because every note has to be already in concordance to the other existing voices. In the Rolking, we only had the tenor, so he was quite free to noodle around without interfering too much in the other ones. So keeping the other 2 voices is already a challenge. So the contra line is already very well written, but then he just made it a canon. And a canon is a voice that, at the given interval, voice contrapuntally with itself and with all the other voices. But this canon is not only a normal canon, it's a canon that is displaced a quarter note. So it's very close. And a quarter note, if you think about it, you cannot do many movements without creating dissonances and seconds and stuff that are non-desirable. So to be able to have achieved this is a feat, and he was of course showing what he was able to do.
And Scott, as we anticipate listening to a credo from the Missa Fortuna Desperata, what should we know? What should we be listening for or enjoying?
In the Mass, Josquin uses all 3 of the parts of the original song as cantus firmus in one way or another in different movements. And in this movement, it's the melody of the song, the top part, which he puts in the highest part of the Mass. And the singer of the top part sings that melody 4 times in a row, at first starting out very slowly, and then twice as fast as that, and then a bit faster again, and then faster yet at the end. But there are other wonderful things going on in here, which are disguised in a way by your ear being drawn to the melody and all this other wonderful melodic material which Josquin has generated underneath it. In the last section of the credo, it's when there's a final sort of mensuration change or time metrical meter shift at the end. From that point to the end, the tenor sings the same melodic material, slightly varied, 11 times in a row.
Cool.
The miracle is the harmonic context and the contrapuntal context is changing all the time, so that those 11 statements of the same material run under a complete statement of the original melody of the song.
Yeah.
So it's possible to not even notice that it's there. But if you notice, pick out the tenor, it's Jason McStutes, you will hear that he just sings the same thing over and over again in this constantly shifting context, which generates, whether you notice it or not, this amazing sort of momentum towards the end of the piece, which is an extraordinarily joyful mass.
Well, incredible virtuosity of composition and performance. We will return for a live Q&A with our artists. In the meantime, enjoy De Tu Bien Plein by Josquin in 4 voices and the Credo from the Missa Fortuna Desperata. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Still to come is a live Q&A with Deborah and guests from tonight's episode. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, be sure to subscribe or to like Les Délices' page to learn about upcoming episodes and be the first to know when we're going live. If you're watching on SalonEra.org, simply refresh your browser at the end of this video and the live stream Q&A should appear. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, watch for a notification that the Les Délices account is going live. You can write questions for any or all of the episode's artists in the comments section below. They'll be answering your questions live in just a few minutes. While we're getting set up, please enjoy previews of upcoming programs from SalonEra and Les Délices. Join us on March 7th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for a special episode for Women's History Month, centered around select favorite appearances from the SalonEra archive. I will be your guide as we revisit conversations with Elizabeth Winefield, Catalina Vicens, and Michelle Kennedy, which highlight and feature performances of music by Isabella Leonarda, Lenora Duarte, Madalena Lombardini-Sierman, and others. See you then.